Before we get to the interview with Dave Cariens talking about his new book, Outrageous Investigating Mass Shootings, I want to take a moment as in between recording and publishing this episode, Florida State University here in Tallahassee on April 17th had a mass shooting where there were two victims killed, T. Rowe Chamba and Robert Morales, along with six others injured in the shooting. For those that may not know, I live in Tallahassee. My wife works for Florida State University. Fortunately, she was out of town that day, but this still struck home for me. So I encourage you to listen to this episode as David talks about using his analytical skills to investigate mass shootings in Virginia and talk about all the matters that he found. All proceeds go to charity. You can find his book on Amazon, and you can also find it at davecariens.com. That's DAVECARIENS.com. That's DAVECARIENS.com. Thank you, and I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
How we doing, analyst? Jason Elder here with a very special episode with LEA Podcast. I have invited back David Cariens, who has a new book, Outrageous Investigating Mass Shootings, due out April 12th. David, how we doing?
We're doing fine. Thank you, Jason.
All right. And for the listeners, if you don't remember, we had David on in 2022. He is nicknamed the Analyst Writer, and he had a 51-year career with the CIA, longtime instructor of intelligence writing at the IALEA conference, has written several books now, Effective Intelligence Briefings and a Handbook of Intelligence and Crime Analysis, to name a few. He also has written several books now on mass shootings in Virginia in particular, which is what the subject of this latest book is. So, David, now that I've set the stage there, I know you have been a part of, unfortunately, several different mass shootings that have gone on in Virginia over the last couple of decades. And this is kind of a combination of what you learned from those mass shootings. So before we dive in too far, what was your inspiration behind writing this book?
Jason, I think, as you know, I started down this path when the mother of my oldest grandchild was killed at the first mass shooting here in Virginia in January of 2002. And part of my dealing with that tragedy was to look into it and to try and analyze and see what happened. In that process, it became apparent to me that we were not being told the truth. And the more I butted my head against brick walls with officials, school officials, and politicians, and some others, the more determined I became to get to the bottom of what happened. And in part, it was for healing of my family, and also for Angie. Angie was the mother of my oldest grandchild, and also for her family. I felt somewhat unique, and that is that as an intelligence analyst at the time, I had over 30 years of work, and I'd recently retired from the agency before I was still working for them on contract. And I felt I brought a particularly unique perspective to it, and that is a very, very personal, having been in many ways a victim of one of these mass shootings. Certainly my family was, and the analytic skills to try and get to the bottom of what happened. And so I produced my first book, and it has now it's on its third volume. Not because it is a big seller or burning up the charts, but the publisher that I'm with thinks the book is significant enough that it needs to be revised periodically and brought out, and that's exactly what I've done. So I half serious and half joking refer to it as my first book and also my most recent book, which it is until this new book comes out on April 12th. So that's what got me started out. And then I went on when the Virginia Tech shooting occurred. I said to my wife, from what I was seeing from the news reports and what I was picking up, I said, this is the Appalachian School of Law all over, except it's on a massive scale. Mm-hmm. And I read the Washington Post did an interview with the Samaha family, and with particularly the father, Joe Samaha, their daughter was killed in the French class. And so I got a hold of the reporter and told him what I had done, what I'd written, and said, I have a whole file cabinet full of research and laws, Virginia laws, and Virginia Supreme Court decisions and things of that nature. They're welcome to it. And I said, if you would, but I do not want to call the Samaha family. I have a rule that I've followed throughout my work on this. I never, ever contact any of the victims or the families. It's an invasion of their privacy. They have to contact me. But I did feel in this case, I had a lot of information, saved them a lot of time. And so I met with them, with Joe Samaha. And out of that relationship, I was introduced to quite a number of the families. And finally, one of them, father of a young man killed in the German class, asked me if I would do the same for them. And that is to write a book that tells the truth about what happened at Virginia Tech and exposes what has gone on there, which was very similar to the Appalachian School of Law in terms of officials not being cooperative. And I don't want to say that they hid information, but it came awfully close to that. So that led me to my second one. And then the third one was the Virginia Beach mass shooting. And I was a member of the Hampton Roads Writers. And I got an email from the chairman or head of that organization saying, we have a member who worked in the building in Virginia Beach, knew all of the people who were killed and all of those who are wounded, and he's suffering from severe PTSD. He asked me if we have a writer who has addressed this subject, and if so, he would like to talk to me. Would you be willing to talk to him? And of course, the answer was yes. So I talked with him, and out of that came contact with the husband of one of the women who was killed at Virginia Beach. And he contacted me and wanted to know if we could talk. He wanted my help, and I said, okay, Jason, absolutely, but let me send you my books. And then unbeknownst to me, he took, after reading them, he went to Delegate Converse Fowler, who, along with our current Attorney General, had sponsored a bill in the Virginia legislature to establish a commission to investigate. And the next thing I knew, I was on that commission. Mm. And that was really an eye-opener in terms of what goes on behind the scenes that's pretty unsavory. And this phenomenon that exists, that seems to exist, at least in Virginia, that the people in positions of authority circle the wagons and they protect the institution and organization at all cost, and they protect people's careers, and in doing so, they effectively block investigations. So out of all of that, I decided I see these patterns, and sometimes I am asked, do you see patterns in these shootings? And the answer is yes, I do. I see patterns in the killers, and I see patterns in the response of politicians and the leaders of the organization, whether it's a school or a business, and their response. I see certain patterns. And as far as I knew, no one had written anything like that. And my son had wanted me to write my memoir, and so I decided to write my memoir in stages. And a very important part of my life has been investigating these mass shootings, and hence the book that's coming out on April 12th, which is called Outrageous, and pulls all of this together. It's a no holds barred book, and I sometimes I here in Eastern Virginia, I'm periodically asked to give talks, and I begin the talk by saying, look, you need to know at some point in this talk, you're probably going to be annoyed, if not mad at me, because I'm an equal opportunity offender. I do not shy away from calling out Republicans, Democrats, Tea Party politicians, Green Party, whatever they are, because they all have one thing in common, certain members of them, and that is a reluctance to really dig in and do a true investigation and find out what has happened. Instead, they want to gloss over and write nice little shiny reports about what are the best security practices. No, you have to use the powers of an intelligence analyst, the skills that we develop, and dig into what happened. Get the evidence. You need primary sources. You need to talk with the people that were there. You need to talk with the family members and the family members of the killer. You need to do the kind of research that an intelligence analyst does in looking for primary sources. And that's exactly what I've done in all of those. And I've tried to pull them together in this one book that I hope people will find useful. And I think it explains in part why we still have this epidemic of mass shootings, despite all of the crocodile tears and hand-wringing that we have on the part of people in positions of power and trust, and yet nothing is really ever done. So that's kind of a long way, Jason, to tell you how I got to where I am with this book.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on your being on the governor's commission, you end up resigning because they decide to just write best practices for security instead of researching and investigating specifically what happened at the Virginia Beach shooting.
Yeah, and Jason, that was the culmination of an awful lot of things, including, for example, the police analysts listening to this, or the police officers, know as well as I do that a timeline in a crime is extremely important. That's where your investigation begins. That's the basis of it. And I kept asking the chairman of the commission, who was a former police officer, and saying to him, we need to construct a timeline. We need to know who was where and what and all of the events, and going back even to the killer, over the killer's life over the last few years. We need to construct a timeline. And at one point, he looked at me, and I forget, I was probably about the 20th time I suggested a timeline. And he looked at me and he said, oh, David, I'm not interested if it's 2 or 3 seconds one way or another. And I said, you should be, because 2 or 3 seconds can make the difference between life and death. And sure enough, while I was on the commission, the Virginia Beach police, the first responders, released the audio of their response. And in many respects, those men and women are victims, because they got into the building, the municipal building, and because of faulty security protocols, which each floor of that building had different combinations, different ways to enter it, and no knockbox with a master key or master combinations or whatever it was. And the police stood outside in the hall while the killer was behind the doors shooting people. And I matched up. I made my own timeline, and I matched my timeline up against the police audio recording. Mm-hmm. And at least one person was killed and one was injured, while the police could not get access to where the shooting was going on. I mean, that's, to me, just absolutely incredible. To my knowledge, it does not appear in the final report. It appears in what I wrote. I wrote, as I think I told you, my own report and released it to the press and to the governor and the attorney general, and I have it all in there. But I just would not be party to that sort of what I consider to be deceit.
Yeah.
And so I stuck it out until a few months before they resigned, but it was clear that I was not going to have much of a voice in anything that was said, that it would be a glossy, these are the best practices.
Yeah. I do find it interesting You talk about it in the book, the patterns of the aftermath and protecting the institution. Typically, when analysts are working an investigation, doing case support for an investigation, they're out trying to find the suspect, the person, the murderer. In these cases, it's the shooter is known, the shooter is no longer with us. It's the aftermath of the whole thing, and it just doesn't seem like there's that appetite to really tell the entire story. What's left now is they're trying to avoid everybody blaming the institution for
Yeah,
the lack of response. That's the idea of trying to protect the institution, because the more you dig, the more you find out stuff that you're talking about with the different
that's
level,
exactly
the
right.
different floors.
Well, and for example, in the case of Virginia Tech, that shooter could have done little. The only thing, he was sending signals right and left, and at one point he was actually taken. The Virginia Tech Police Department, after he had been harassing a female student, took him into custody, and he was diagnosed by a psychologist there on the campus as a threat to himself and others. And yet he was taken to a mental hospital and released the next morning. In effect, for lack of other words, I would say on his own recognizance and on the proviso that he sought help. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible.
How
It,
far
it,
from that was the shooting? Was how close? How many number of days, weeks, months?
well, I would say it was, if I recall correctly, I don't remember the exact. I would say it was about 6 or 7 months
Mm,
before the actual shooting.
yeah.
He, yeah, these, and the other thing is these killers are insidious. In the case of Virginia Beach, in order to save money, they were diverting. I found out in my research they some of the components of that municipal building were diverting money from safety training for employees and for safety protocols in their area of the building. They were diverting it to other expenses. And one of the things I found out in the research at Virginia Beach is a lot of the people said, we didn't know what to do. We'd never had any drills or any training on how do you react if there's an active shooter. And that I find almost jaw-dropping, because of the fact that Virginia was, in this century, had already had 2 mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them at a university, well, both of them at one of the law college and the other at a major university. And you would think that the idea of good security protocol would have been very high on the agenda of the management of the city of Virginia Beach, and apparently it was not. And I'll tell you what, in my research I checked with other cities in Virginia and interviewed their human resources people. And I was dumbfounded by Roanoke and Alexandria, the types of protocol and training that those municipalities have for their employees. I mean, it was great. It was almost a model for others to follow. And those 2 cities could do it, but Virginia Beach, the state's largest city, paid very little attention to it.
Mm. What were some of the things in particular that Alexandria did?
What I recall is that they had regular training and they had regular drills. Those 2 things. I'd have to go back and pull out the notes from the memorandum of conversation I did when I did the interview. But they listed the type of training that they were doing. They told me the type of training they were doing and how often they had. And furthermore, it was mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
It was not if you want to go, which Virginia Beach did offer some form of active shooter training if you want to go. And I only found 2 people out of the nearly 40 people that I interviewed who went to the training.
Yeah.
So there's some very, there's almost a Sherlock Holmes type mystery to the Virginia Beach shooting. The killer was shot, was taken to the hospital, and died shortly after that. Well, when the police and the FBI went through his condo, they searched the condo looking for evidence, and I've seen the pictures and read the reports on it. But what was puzzling is that after the search was done, both of them, and maybe it was joint, I don't recall, but issued a public statement as to what they found. And most importantly, they said, we did not find a laptop. Well, usually when you, in police work, when you do a research, when you do a search like that, you tell people what you found, what you did not find.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very puzzling. And then, of course, over 2 years later, his laptop shows up. Well, some of the people that I was interviewing had said, we saw him with his laptop. We know he had a laptop. We don't know what happened to it, but he had a laptop. And one of the family members of a victim sued the estate of the killer, and as part of the award got access to, took possession of the condo. She found a laptop in a box in the dining room. And I was able to get a hold of a copy of the hard drive. And the only thing on the hard drive is pornography. There was nothing else. There wasn't there. We know that he researched the internet for weapons and for ammunition. None of that's on there. Most people, they have a Gmail account or a Hotmail account or something. There's going to be that. None of that is on there. There is absolutely nothing.
So do you think it was removed? Because that's
I most definitely. I think that laptop was tampered with. Absolutely. But without the chain of control over that laptop it was lost. So who knows who had it? But in the book, I use a methodology that I was taught, and that is you look at who would possibly have tampered with it.
Who would benefit?
And there are 3 candidates. One is the killer's family. 2 is the Virginia Beach police, and 3 is the FBI. So what I ruled, pure speculation, but I rule out the family, because why would the family erase everything and leave something that might be interpreted as damage to the personality of the man? That is all this, his addiction with pornography. I would think they would have erased that, and they would have left his Gmail account on it and his Hotmail. And furthermore, one of the questions about that Virginia Beach killer was whether or not he was seeking psychological counseling. And I kept hearing, no, he wasn't, no, he wasn't, no, he wasn't. Well, I interviewed a man who suffered, I think, the worst PTSD that I have ever come across. That man, it was a phone interview, and he said, I'm going to give you the security number, the emergency number, because I periodically have horrible flashbacks and I have to be rushed to the emergency room. And this interview may spark it. If I go into one of those, would you please call this emergency number and have them? That's how bad this gentleman was. So he told me, I asked him what he knew about the killer, and he said, well, I did. He said, even before the shooting, I was seeing a counselor, and I saw him in the waiting room in the psychological counselor's office. So yes, he was seeing someone. And there are so many things from my work on that commission that we could not get to the bottom of, but that's extremely important. We need to know if that killer was seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist. Once you are dead in the state of Virginia, all your rights to privacy goes. So there's no reason why that commission could not have had access to his medical records. What would that have told us? Was he on a medication that may have led to the shooting? Was he schizophrenic? So it's what's troubling to me is we had an opportunity on that commission, I think, to perhaps make a small difference and at least surface some aspects of these mass shootings that might help warn against others and prevent other mass shootings. But that did not happen. That did not happen. The city, in some of the interviews that I had, the employees said, I'm here even though I was advised not to talk to the commission, and my fellow workers told me if I talk to you, there might be retaliation, which leads to another thing. One of the things to come out of all of these shootings, Jason, is if you set up a commission to investigate a mass shooting, you give that commission subpoena power. Now, what does that do? Under the law with subpoena powers, if someone talks to the commission, there is a law that prevents any retaliation against that individual. And a manager who retaliates under it can I'm not sure what the penalty is, but it is. I had one person who said, I would like to talk with you. I have information about the lack of building security, but if I talk to you, there's a chance they'll find out and I'll be fired, and I'm of an age group, it'll be hard to find another job and I'll lose all my pension. And that's what happened. And I've documented all of this in the book. As I said, it's a no holds barred book, but that's the only way we are ever going to do anything to begin to cut down on the numbers of these mass shootings.
So
we've got to get at the truth, no matter how harsh or how severe that truth is. And despite what they said at the law school, despite what they said at Virginia Tech, despite what they said at Virginia Beach, all of these killers were sending signals that they were violent, every single one of them. And yet those two schools and that city government say there were no signals. In the case of Virginia Beach, with the research that I did, the city and the Virginia Beach police said, well, he wasn't sending any signals. And I found, I forget whether it's 12 or 14 signals that he was sending that should have set off alarm bells. Now, whether it would have prevented, I don't know. But ignoring these signals means there's a very good chance that violence is inevitable. So no matter how difficult it is for a manager to come to terms with these people, and they have to do it. I know when I worked at CIA as an intelligence analyst, I was a manager, and I had to go through a training class, and I forget there was 2 or 3 days, and a large chunk of that class was how do you identify troubled individuals, and what do you do, what actions are appropriate, how do you get them the help that they need. And I will tell you, in my career, I had 2 very troubled individuals, one who I found out was threatening suicide. And I was able to get him to psychologists and psychiatrists through the CIA, and he has had a fantastic career. Another one was very similar. He was violent and was very strange and very peculiar. And I got him psychological counseling. So I don't buy the fact that, you can't do that with other people. It's invasion of their privacy. Well, I would call shooting people an invasion of their privacy. And which one is worse?
yeah. Well,
So in fact, even let me tell you, on the commission, and I'm sorry, as you can tell, I get charged up a little bit about this. We were discussing one day on the commission exactly about this subject, and one of the commissioners, who was a former City of Virginia Beach official and should never have been on the commission, said, well, the city couldn't really do anything if there were warning signs because it was his civil rights would have been violated. And I just looked at him and said, I believe the civil rights of 12 people who were shot were violated in a very, very bad way. I mean, I found that a jaw-dropping statement, particularly by someone who is supposed to be on a commission who's investigating.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on it earlier with the Virginia Tech shooter just released on his own recognizance, right? I mean, that's the thing about it is like if there are mental issues, they are no longer able to make the right decisions.
That is correct. That is absolute. In all of these shootings, in fact, if you go back to Virginia Tech, Jason, their security protocol prior to the shooting was one of the best in this country of any university. I read it. It is extremely impressive. The failure in all of these shootings is human failure. You can have all the technology you want. You can have all the protocols written, but if you don't have the right people with the backbone to take steps that may be uncomfortable, but are nevertheless necessary, you're going to have these shootings. That's frankly, what I just said is the tragedy of Virginia Tech. They had in place an absolutely superb security protocol. And on the morning of the shooting, after the double homicide in Ambler West Johnston Hall, when the president of the university was talking to, I'm sure it was the Virginia Tech police chief, he was talking to the police in the dormitory at the site of the murder and said, should we warn the campus? He said, no, don't warn the campus. They had a warning that would have locked down everything. I believe to this day 32 people would be alive if they had followed the protocol.
Oof.
And what makes, when you go back and you research things and why you have to, sometimes in the evening, you have to have at least a double martini because it's just so upsetting. The school had a whole history of warning. When a prisoner broke out of a jail in Blacksburg, they locked down the campus, and there was no indication that the guy was even near the campus. They warned the campus for a measles outbreak. They warned the campus for mold in certain buildings. They were warning all the time, as they should have been. But the critical warning did not take place. And 32 people paid the supreme price for that. And at least 17 other were wounded, because we don't know how many were wounded. Some people left that campus who were wounded and never came back. We don't, that's why I say at least 17.
Yeah. You can obviously hear the emotional toll that working on these cases has had on you. And
Yes.
it's something that we've talked about on this show from time to time, the mental toll on analysts and working some of these cases. Just talk a little bit about this. I know you've gone through this process a couple of times, but I still feel that there's probably moments where you have to either take a break or get rejuvenated before proceeding.
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you that yes, it has taken a toll, and I've been under pressure from I have 3 sons, and at least one of them, our youngest one, and my wife, did not want me to do this. When I wrote the book on Angie's killing, I felt I had to do it because it was part of what I needed to do to reconstruct my life, to get some semblance of normalcy back. And one of the patterns that I see with the families of victims are the differences between men and women. And that is the families that I have dealt with, invariably, the mothers or the wives or the aunts, who whatever the female is, they concentrate on healing. Whereas the male, I won't say the male wants revenge, but he wants to get to the bottom of it. He wants to find what went wrong, and he wants to know who screwed up, and they're adamant with it. And so there's that difference, and that my family fell into that because my wife did not want me to write the book. She said we need to concentrate on healing, and I said I can't heal until these questions are answered, so I have to do it. And she said, well, she's also my editor. And I said to her, she said, well, I will not read it. And I said, okay. And so I had the galleys. It was ready to be published. I was proofing the galleys, and she came into my office and she said, I better read that thing before it comes out. So she read it, and all she did was hand it back, and she said, I understand. But after that, and on the morning of the Virginia Tech shooting, I had surgery, and we were sitting in the family room. And my wife looked at me when the news broke of the 2 people being killed. She looked at me and she said, don't you dare write a book on that. Don't bring death back into this family.
Yeah, that's really tough. But so all right, well, so as you mentioned before, your whole career kind of led you to this moment in the skills and abilities and training that you got through the CIA, the research skills, the writing, the asking questions, all put you in this moment to be able to do this, to tell these stories, to get the word out, to identify the issues of the aftermath of these mass shootings.
You're right. I sort of felt and that I was in a very unique position, because you may have people who have done exactly the same thing that I have in their police work or the FBI or the CIA, but they haven't had a family member killed. So I felt that I brought to this problem both aspects of what was needed, and that is I had the emotional experience of having a member of my family be gunned down. Plus I had the skills, the analytic skills, to get to the bottom of it. And I felt that was unique. and I don't know how unique it is, but I doubt if there are very many men and women like me who have suffered the loss of a family member and also have all this background in police and intelligence work. So, yeah, I felt that's one of the reasons why I've continued. And to be quite truthful, it's awfully difficult because after I did the Virginia Tech, my wife said the same thing. No more of these books. My son said the same thing. Stop it, Dad. It's bad for your health. I was diagnosed with cancer shortly after I finished the Angie book. And my wife to this day thinks it was the stress of that. I'm not so sure. But at any rate, it is a fact that happened. But I will tell you, Jason, if a mother or father calls you and their child has been killed and they say, we need your help, I can't say no.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for what you've done, for coming on here today. It's great insight. For the listeners, the book's out April 12th. Again, it's Outrageous Investigating Mass Shootings. We will put a link in the show notes here to give you access if you want to purchase the book. And David, once again, thank you.
Can I say
so
one
much.
other thing, Jason?
Absolutely.
Can I say one other quick? Yeah. I don't take any money for these books. All of the money goes to charities.
That's awesome. No, that is you are a saint, David.
Okay. No, believe me, Jason, I am not. But let me just tell you another aspect of this. I know that there are vultures out there who play on the families, and I will not take. I'm pleased to say, by the way, that the Virginia Tech book, I've been able to give several $1,000s to the Michael Poley Jr. Scholarship Fund, and Michael was killed.
All right, David. Thank you so much for being here. Outrageous Investigating Mass Shootings, out April 12th. David, thank you again. I really appreciate your time here today, and you be safe.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Jason. Bye-bye.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.